What if I told you that right beneath your feet there could be a hidden world filled with the wandering spirits of those long gone? Would you believe me? Hi loves, it's Aura. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to a brand new video. In this episode of the Haunted History of, we will be talking about Mary King's Close in Edinburgh, Scotland, said to be the most haunted place in Edinburgh. The legend surrounding how Mary King's Close became so haunted focuses around the Black Plague that struck Edinburgh in the 1600s. Before we dive into the haunted history, let's set the tone. A close is a narrow alleyway that runs between buildings, and Edinburgh had many of these such alleyways in the 17th century where people lived and worked out of. Many still exist in Edinburgh today, like the one pictured here. Mary King's Close is just one of these closes in Edinburgh, but this one is particularly famous due to how well preserved it is, which we will get to shortly. It was also the close that was nearest to the Old Norloch, a stagnant and highly polluted marsh. Most of the ancient closes have either been filled in or converted to streets and dead ends. Because Edinburgh sits on a hill, the aristocrats lived close to the top of the hill and the castle, which put them high above the stench of the city. The poor lived further downhill, not only living in small houses and tenement buildings, but also living in filth. People still used chamber pots and would empty them twice a day out of their windows into the streets, usually shouting "Gardy Lou." And because of the steep slope of the city, the waste would run downhill towards where the poor lived and into Norloch. Because the city was situated on such a sharp hill, this allowed for many of the old closes to be buried under newer buildings and used as their foundation. This close is named after Mary King, an affluent merchant burgess who was also a widow, who lived in two of the buildings of the close starting around 1635. She is thought to have been a textile merchant and a rather influential one, since women at that time rarely had parts of cities named after them. Around this time, Edinburgh had a population boom. The walls that had once protected the city now left little room for expansion. Mary King's Close was a series of smaller alleyways that were connected, housing numerous towering tenement buildings, and is said to contain the world's first skyscraper, with buildings reaching 8 to 11 stories tall. The people at the time started building upwards, literally right on top of each other. Many large families of 8 or more were living in small, single-room houses in these tenements. Due to the poor sanitary conditions of the time, and with over 500 people living in Mary King's Close alone, when the bubonic plague peaked in 1645, the closes of Edinburgh were hit particularly hard, and a staggering number of people died. While stories of sealing the diseased away in the closes have circulated for years, it is probably more likely that the hotspots for the plague were quarantined areas, which back in those days often meant sealing the sick away. Only one person was allowed into the closes, the official plague doctor at the time, Dr. George Ray. After the previous plague doctor died of the plague, he was hired to help prevent further spread of the illness. He would have to wade through ankle-deep human waste that was found in the streets to visit the sick in a traditional plague outfit, with thick leather clothing and a long-beaked bird mask stuffed with herbs to help keep the stench of sickness and disease away. He didn't know it at the time, but the thick leather guarded him against the fleas that carried the deadly bacteria. His treatment for the plague boils was to cut the top of the boil off to drain the infection, clean with vinegar or alcohol, and cauterize the lesion with a hot poker. And keep in mind that this was before the time of anesthetic. By 1750, the closes were in a horrific state of decay, with many people refusing to live or do business in the buildings. It was proposed that the Royal Exchange should be built over Mary King's Close so that There was a building for merchants to conduct business in, and national records could be kept. It could be said that this was gentrification, since most of the city's merchants did not want to be seen amongst the poor and wanted a place for other affluent people to gather. By 1753, most of the close was demolished to ground level, and the lower levels going downhill were simply sealed away and built on top of to make the foundation for the exchange, in hopes of making Edinburgh more level. Mary King's Close was reopened in 2003 once archaeologists and historians finished analyzing all of the evidence of what life had been like for the 17th century residents. Now, Mary King's Close is open to public tours and paranormal teams. Okay, on to the hauntings. In 1685, the first documentation of paranormal activity was recorded. The Coldart family moved into Mary King's Close after the last outbreak of the plague. Shortly after moving into the close, Thomas Coldart and his wife started experiencing apparitions and other phantom energies. Some other reported paranormal activity in the close show incidents of a worried man who is a phantom who wanders around the close, wringing his hands and seen muttering. A woman in black, thought to be Mary King herself. Mr. Chesney, who was the last resident of the close before being forced to leave. What is thought to be his apparition is seen standing in the corner of his house. Women are said to have the strongest reactions in his house, with even the tour guides refusing to go into the home. The most famous ghost of Mary King's Close is a little girl called Annie. In 1992, a group of Japanese filmmakers visited the close, and one of the members was a psychic. She was largely unimpressed with the close until she got to one of the smaller rooms. When she entered, she was struck with an intense feeling of sickness, hunger, loneliness, and being cold. The psychic turned to leave, completely overwhelmed, when she felt someone pull on her clothes. She saw a little girl around the age of 8 in ragged clothing with matted hair and a dirty, tear-stained face. This psychic and many psychics after her have said that this little girl was abandoned by her parents during the plague and was left to die alone. During the plague, parents often left their children behind in fear of the plague spreading. These children were locked away with the other sick people and left to die. In Annie's room, people often hear laughter and crying, will have their clothes tugged on, and will have their hands held. In Japanese culture, offerings left to the dead are thought to appease the spirits and ease their suffering. This psychic came back and left a doll for Annie, and many visitors since then have done the same, creating a shrine out of affection. There have also been instances of audible paranormal activity. Many people hear horses, footsteps, thuds, screams, moans of pain, and many things apparently said in distress. One such thing that was heard was a disembodied male voice saying, "Come back. Get her. That's the baby. Hello. Trying to get through." Many visitors have also felt their hair played with, their arms touched, clothes pulled, and unexplained cold spots. So what do you think? Is Mary King's Close still home to the inhabitants of years gone by? Or are the apparitions created by the gases of the nearby marsh? Let me know down below. As always, thank you for watching this episode of The Haunted History Of. If you have any ideas of what my next haunted build should be, let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more spooky content. It really helps my channel out a lot. Stay safe and stay spooky, friends, and I will see you in the next one.